Senator J.D. Vance leaned forward, lips curled into a half-smirk, and tapped the mic like he was about to deliver a punchline on late-night TV. $100 million. For hurt feelings. From a man in a red coat. The courtroom chuckled. Cameras clicked. Even the judge's mouth twitched, just barely. Senator J.D. Vance looked pleased with himself. He thought he was here to swat away a publicity stunt. But what he didn't know, what no one in that chamber knew, was that Ezra Flint wasn't there for the money. He came with something heavier, something older, a truth that had been buried so deep. It took years of silence and one sharp insult to finally bring it to the surface, and once it came out, it wouldn't just bruise Vance's political career, it would detonate it. Before we show you what unraveled in that courtroom, take a second to hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. What happens next will stick with you. The royal courts of justice had seen some odd cases over the years, but nothing quite like this. Defamation lawsuits usually meant tabloids, celebrities, or rival business empires, not a decorated Coldstream Guard squaring off against an American senator. But there it was, printed in black and white on the docket that gray October morning. Corporal Ezra Flint versus Senator James David Vance. Outside, the London air was sharp and mean, the kind that makes news reporters huddle deeper into their jackets while they wait for a soundbite. American press had flown in overnight. Most expected a quick, headline-worthy dismissal, a prideful soldier insulted, a senator barely fazed. They didn't expect a reckoning. Inside, the courtroom was surprisingly quiet, not packed, not empty, just full of that strange hum that happens when people know something's coming. But not what. Murmurs drifted like dust in the tall marble space. Ezra Flint stood alone at the claimant's table. No attorney, no aides, no thick folders or screens full of exhibits. Just a man standing still like only soldiers can be. At 47, he wore his age the way he wore his uniform, with precision. The red tunic was crisp and perfect. The white gloves increased. And beside him, on the bench, sat the towering bearskin hat that tourists took pictures of, never realizing what it meant to wear one. He didn't fidget, didn't glance around. He just stood. Meanwhile, across the aisle, the scene looked like a campaign war room. 3 barristers, 2 assistants, laptops, binders, charts. It was overkill for a case that, by their estimation, should have lasted an hour, maybe 2. J.D. Vance sat like a man used to winning. Tailored navy suit, easy posture. He turned to his lead counsel with the casual confidence of someone ordering steak at a familiar restaurant. "How long are we expecting this to drag?" he asked, not bothering to whisper. 30, 45 minutes, the lawyer replied, barely hiding a smirk. "He's solo, no legal training. This should be light work." Vance nodded and relaxed. When the judge called for opening statements, Vance leaned into the microphone like he'd done it 1,000 times, and he had. His voice hit that perfect politician's rhythm. Respectful, serious, and just conversational enough to feel genuine. "Your Honor," he began, "I want to express my deep appreciation for the British people and their traditions. However, this lawsuit is based on a misunderstanding. A harmless remark taken far too seriously." On the courtroom monitors, a video clip began to play, one his legal team had queued up like it was just another day in the campaign trail highlight reel. It was footage from a posh corporate dinner 2 weeks earlier. Vance stood at the podium, champagne flutes clinking in the background, audience in black tie. "You know, I saw those guards outside Buckingham Palace," he said in the clip, a pause for dramatic effect. "And I thought, that's a lot of taxpayer money for a bunch of well-dressed lawn ornaments." Laughter. More laughter when he added, "At least they're good at standing still. Maybe we should hire one for Congress." In the courtroom, a few people chuckled. Before catching themselves, Ezra Flint didn't move. Not a blink, not a breath out of rhythm. Back at the mic, Vance pressed on. "With full respect to Mr. Flint," he said, "we live in a time where satire is part of free speech. And that's not just an American value, it's a democratic one." He was warming up now, slipping into the tone that had earned him magazine covers and primetime interviews. "Let's be honest," he added, tilting his head slightly toward the press gallery. "Standing at a gate even in a beautiful uniform isn't quite battlefield heroics." One of his lawyers flinched. Quietly, a flicker of concern. "Senator," the aide whispered, tapping a pen against the notes, but Vance waved him off. He was sure the hard part was over. He had no idea that the storm hadn't even started yet. The lawyer leaned toward him again and whispered, just low enough to avoid microphones. "Maybe he's off." Vance didn't even look at him. "I'm simply pointing out," he said, still smiling for the cameras, "that there's a meaningful difference between actual combat experience and, well, ceremonial performance art." He waved a hand in Ezra Flint's direction, as if motioning toward a prop on stage. "Now, disrespect intended, of course. I'm sure it's a very polished performance." A few more chuckles rolled in from the back. His legal team didn't laugh. They were too busy glancing between each other, suddenly unsure if the senator understood the room as well as he thought he did. Because what no one realized, not Vance, not the press, not even the judge, was that Ezra Flint hadn't filed this lawsuit for ego. He hadn't shown up to chase headlines. He had come to pull back a curtain that was never meant to move. A truth kept in the dark, carefully buried beneath politics, pride, and silence. And now, for the first time, he was ready to speak. The judge turned his attention to the other table. "Mr. Flint, you may respond when ready." Silence, not the silence of confusion or hesitation. This was something else. It was the silence of someone who had waited years for this exact moment and wasn't about to waste it by rushing. Across the courtroom, Vance relaxed into his chair, ankle crossed over knee. His performance had gone smoothly. He assumed Flint's silence was surrender. Another man outmatched and prepared, trying to save face. He didn't even try to hide his confidence. "I've been in government long enough," he said, arms wide in that practiced, open palm gesture, "to recognize when people take things more personally than intended." He spoke slowly, carefully, his voice dripping with that familiar brand of polished humility politicians used when they wanted to sound fair while delivering a dismissal. "This case isn't about libel," he said. "It's about pride, wounded pride, not legal injury." A staffer handed him a slim folder, timing perfect. He opened it with a showman's flair, flipping to a tab page like it had been rehearsed. "I'd like to submit several public responses to my comments," he said. "For instance, this gem." He paused, tapping the page, "from a British columnist who said, and I quote, 'Perhaps our royal guards could use a little humor. Their stone faces have been frightening tourists for decades.'" Laughter. Again, not a roar, but enough to echo off the courtroom walls. Ezra Flint didn't flinch. He sat still, hands lightly clasped, expression unreadable. No anger, no offense, nothing. It was as if he was listening to elevator music. Vance closed the folder with a sharp snap. "Look," he continued, "I don't question Corporal Flint's dedication. I'm sure he served admirably. But let's be honest, this is about spectacle. The changing of the guard is a tourist event. It's pageantry. Nobody's pretending these are elite commandos. My joke was satire, clearly. It was never personal." He paused again, dropping into what he clearly believed was his strongest argument. "No one was harmed by my words. Unless we're now in an era where mild comedy is a legal offense, then just as the smirk returned, the judge's voice cut in like a scalpel. "Mr. Vance, I'll remind you, this is a court of law, not a campaign rally." Vance blinked. "Yes, of course. My apologies, Your Honor." He gave a small nod, then pressed on, undeterred. "However, since commentary has been entered into evidence, I trust rebuttal will be permitted under oath." That was when something shifted. It was subtle, a change in the temperature of the room. The air grew still, as if something had stopped breathing. Reporters in the gallery sat up a little straighter. The murmurs faded. The pressure in the room didn't rise, it settled. Like everything had clicked into place, and they were all waiting for the next move. Vance tugged his cuff and continued, not sensing the shift. "The truth is," he said, "I wasn't mocking Ezra Flint, the man. I was commenting on a centuries-old tradition. A ceremony that, let's be honest, exists for photo ops and postcard imagery. The British taxpayer funds it. Tourists love it. If someone's ego is bruised along the way, well, that's unfortunate. But that's not a matter for the courts." He turned to face Flint directly now, fully, waiting, expecting something, a reaction, a glare, a clenched jaw. Something, but Flint gave him nothing. Not even the flicker of an eyelid. The silence that followed wasn't polite. It was alive. It stretched. Long enough that even the courtroom stenographer glanced up. In the press row, whispers began. "Is that it? He's not even arguing." Guys frozen. "This'll be over in 10 minutes. Vance sat back again, this time a little more rigidly. His posture still said confidence. But behind his eyes, something small, something fragile was beginning to unravel. He thought Ezra Flint had brought silence because he had nothing to say. But in truth, he was just making sure everyone was listening before he began. Stillness can mean many things. For Ezra Flint, it wasn't hesitation or fear. It was something older, heavier, discipline etched into bone. Anyone who'd ever served would have recognized it instantly. That quiet steadiness before action, not after defeat. So when the judge finally said, "Mr. Flint, the floor is yours," there was no dramatic rise, no fist-pounding declaration. Just a calm, deliberate movement. He removed his bearskin hat and laid it gently on the rail like it was something sacred. His boots clicked softly against the marble floor, quiet. But somehow each step echoed as if the walls themselves were listening. As he passed Vance's table, the senator glanced over, smug and casual, his expression somewhere between amusement and challenge. The look said, "Let's see what you've got." Flint reached the stand. He turned slowly to face the courtroom. And when he finally spoke, it wasn't with theatrics, no raised voice, no grand statement, just a single sentence, low, steady, and devastating. "I didn't sue because I was offended. I sued because you told a lie people believed." That was it. No speeches, no scolding, just truth, spoken plainly. And something in Vance's grin flickered, barely, but enough, because suddenly the room felt heavier. This wasn't about comedy anymore. This was about consequences. Flint sat down in the witness chair like he'd been there before. No lawyer at his side, no thick binder of statements, just a single, neatly folded piece of paper resting in front of him. And the kind of presence that doesn't come from attention but from being ignored for so long. "You've learned to observe everything. I'd like to make a statement under oath," he said. The judge gave a nod. "Proceed, Corporal Flint." He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Somehow, every word landed like it had been etched in stone. "I didn't wear medals for most of what I did, and I never expected any," he began. "People look at the red coat, the tall hat, and they think it's all for show. Some of it is, but not all." He glanced briefly at his gloved hands. "Several years ago, we were on rotation at Windsor. Routine guard change, tourists everywhere. Nothing unusual. Except we'd been given a quiet heads up, some extra security. No details, just heightened awareness." Across the room, Vance was no longer lounging. His arms were crossed tighter now. He still looked confident, but he was paying attention. "I was stationed at the North Arch. Good visibility. Standard crowd. Phones out. Lots of photos. Normal." Flint paused, tapped the folded paper once against his knee but didn't open it yet. "Then I noticed a man, mid-40s, wearing what looked like a Ministry of Defense contractor badge. But something was off. The design was wrong, about 3 years out of date. And he wasn't watching the ceremony like everyone else. He was tracking someone." The room, already quiet, seemed to go completely still. Even the court reporter slowed. There was a diplomat in the crowd. Foreign consulate. Her visit wasn't public. Her movement wasn't supposed to be known. But he knew. He was watching her every step. Flint kept his voice calm, the way a person might recall the weather. No drama, no flourish. "I left position, not fast, nothing obvious, just enough to intercept. To anyone watching, I probably looked like I was managing crowd behavior. There's even tourist footage online, if you dig deep enough." People thought it was part of the show. He finally lifted the paper, but still didn't unfold it. "But I wasn't performing." Now the silence wasn't just quiet, it was taut. The kind of silence where no one breathes too loudly. Even the judge sat back, focused. "I didn't radio for backup. I didn't draw my weapon. I got close enough to speak to him, to check his credentials." Flint's voice never rose, but his eyes, now scanning the courtroom, carried something heavy. "In his bag, I found a concealed recorder, floor plans of the diplomatic residence, and components for an incendiary device. It was rudimentary, but real, according to the team who handled it. It could have caused mass injuries. Sharp inhale came from the press row. One of the reporters had dropped their pen. He tracked her for 3 weeks, Flint said. You her schedule, her route, her protection detail. What he didn't count on was someone noticing a badge that didn't belong. He paused again, not for effect, but for clarity. The incident was contained, quickly. We were told it couldn't be made public, not because it wasn't serious, but because of what it might trigger diplomatically. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Flynn, is there documentation confirming this? He nodded once. This, he said, carefully unfolding the paper, is a declassified communication from the security service. Released just 2 weeks ago, following a formal records request I submitted through my MP. He held it up for the clerk, who stepped forward to take it. It confirms the incident, the suspect's intent, and states clearly that my actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic breach. The paper was passed to the bench. Ezra Flint didn't move, didn't add anything, because there was nothing more that needed saying. At least not yet. He didn't flinch when the senator laughed. He just stood there, polished boots still, hands clasped behind his back, letting the silence do the talking. His uniform was pressed, his posture perfect. But there was something deeper, like the air on him carried weight. Tell me again. The senator smirked. Why exactly are we here? That moment could have gone unnoticed, just another jab in a courtroom, but something about it shifted the room. Maybe it was the arrogance behind the voice. Maybe it was the way Corporal Ezra Flint didn't blink. But for the first time, the mockery didn't land the way the senator expected. Ezra didn't need to shout. He didn't need to point fingers or slam fists. Instead, he reached into a folder beside him and held up a single sheet of paper. The court clerk walked it forward, a handoff, simple, precise, but every eye followed it. Would you mind reading the highlighted portion aloud? Ezra asked. The judge adjusted her glasses. Her voice was calm, but carried a different gravity. Now, Corporal Ezra Flint's intervention on March 17, 2014, executed without public disruption, prevented a likely attack on a foreign diplomat. His actions, then under complete discretion, averted diplomatic fallout and protected national interests. Commendation noted, in full alignment with security protocol. A breath caught somewhere in the gallery. It wasn't gasps. No headlines being written mid-sentence. Just quiet, collective processing. Senator Vance leaned forward now. His usual confidence softened into something more, and certain. Ezra didn't pile on. He let the words hang like a banner. I didn't bring this case for money, he said, voice low but firm, and I didn't bring it for recognition. I brought it because you used a joke to erase something I was never allowed to talk about. He paused. I served 30 years. I've buried friends who wore this same uniform. I've saluted children holding photos of fathers they'll never see again. I've watched widows stand alone on parade grounds. I never asked anyone to clap. But I won't stand by while someone like you mocks what we actually did. His voice never cracked, never shook. But the weight behind every syllable made it impossible to look away. Then, slowly, he stood, straightened his back, and walked off the stand. Not once did he glance at the senator as he passed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It wasn't even tense. It was reverent. No shifting in seats, no murmurs. Just that heavy, respectful hush. Senator Vance sat stiffly now, his hands flat on the table, jaw clenched. When he finally leaned toward his mic, he started with, well, but didn't seem to know what came next. If this was really so significant, he tried. I imagine we'd have heard of it before now. The judge raised an eyebrow. Are you suggesting covert security operations should come with a press release, Mr. Vance? No, Your Honor, of course not. He backpedaled. I'm just saying it's odd for something so important to stay so hidden. Ezra didn't move, didn't turn, but his voice carried anyway. The men I served with didn't survive on public approval. They survived on trust. It hit like a brick, clean, final. The judge gently laid the letter on her bench like it might break. Corporal Flint, she said, you may return to your seat. No further questions. He gave a small nod and sat down, his hands folding again, calm and steady. No expression of triumph. No smug satisfaction. Just a man who'd said what needed saying. Then, something unexpected happened. A woman in the back stood up. Nobody had called her. Nobody even noticed her until she spoke. "He saved my mother." The room turned. "I didn't know who he was until today," she continued. "My mother never told us what happened. Just that something terrible nearly occurred and someone stepped in, quietly. No spotlight. She didn't cry, but her voice trembled in the quiet. You could feel the truth in her words like a current moving through the gallery. Even the court reporters slowed, fingers hesitant, like they didn't want to break the moment. Ezra didn't turn to acknowledge her. He didn't need to. He already knew. Some men speak for applause. Others speak because the truth deserves air. The silence afterward didn't beg to be filled. It didn't feel empty, it felt full. Even the press sat still. Lenses paused mid-focus, unsure whether the next shot would do justice to what they'd just witnessed. Reality hung heavier than politics. When the judge finally spoke, her voice was measured, her tone precise, but even she couldn't hide the shift in the room. They came expecting a performance. Suits in rows, reporters sharpening pens, and cameras blinking like nervous eyes. But what they got was something else, quiet, cold, and irreversible. When the judge's gavel came down, it didn't bang like thunder. It tapped the desk like a heart skipping a beat. No gasps, no outbursts, just silence. The kind that stretches over a room like fog. People rose slowly from their seats, coats folded over arms, murmuring like mourners at the end of a long funeral. No one declared a winner. No verdict had been read aloud. But everyone knew something had snapped loose, something they wouldn't be able to put back. Senator Vance didn't move. He sat hunched at the defense table, staring at a corner of the wood grain like it might answer for him. His lawyers whispered, shuffled papers, gave each other that look professionals give when the floor shifts beneath them. They hadn't lost, not officially, but they hadn't won either. The hall outside was filled with the hollow sounds of people pretending not to panic. Reporters clicked out messages, staffers whispered damage control strategies, and aides paced like they were trying to outrun the moment. Vance finally emerged. Not through the front where the press swarmed, but through a quieter side door. His shoulders sagged, his stride slower now, almost stiff. When his communications director leaned in to brief him on what came next, interviews, statements, Vance mumbled without looking up. "They didn't know," he said softly, to no one in particular. "Sir," they'd prompted, not sure if he was meant to hear. "I didn't know who he was. He just looked like," but the sentence drifted off and finished. Like Vance knew even the truth wouldn't help him anymore. Another advisor walked up, face flushed, talking fast about optics and transcript delays and how they could maybe soften the blow. But even he could hear the hollowness in his own voice, because once the classified letter from British intelligence was entered into the court record, there was no walking that back. Classified or not, the press had caught the scent. Vance turned suddenly to a junior staffer. "When will the transcript be out?" "Not right away, sir," the kid replied, fidgeting. "The judge will redact anything sensitive first." "Any chance of editorial discretion?" Vance asked, and even he winced at how desperate it sounded. The young man didn't respond, not because he didn't want to help, but because he didn't know if that was even a question with an answer. Back in the main corridor, away from the cluster of suits and strategy, a man walked alone. Ezra Flynn had swapped his ceremonial uniform for a plain overcoat, but his posture wasn't changed upright. Still, exact, not prideful, not performative, just present. When he stepped through the courthouse doors, the crowd was already waiting. Cameras rose, voices surged. "Mr. Flynn, do you expect an apology from Senator Vance? Was this about money or principle? Do you feel vindicated?" He didn't flinch. He didn't rush past. He looked at them, really looked, and spoke only once. "There are men who died wearing that uniform," he said, clear and calm. "I don't wear it lightly." Then he turned and walked down the steps. No security detail, no publicist at his side. Just a man, leaving one fight behind without Pretending it was over, the black cab was already waiting. The driver opened the door not like he was opening it for a politician or a celebrity but for someone he recognized in a different way. A quiet kind of respect. As the taxi pulled away, the shouting faded, but one voice, young female, sincere, cut through the noise. "Thank you," inside the cab. Ezra Flint slid a hand into his coat pocket. The letter was still there, folded, soft at the edges now from months of carrying it. Getting it declassified had taken years. Years of silence. Years of hearing tourists laugh while guards stood motionless in the cold. Years of seeing the ritual turned into a backdrop for selfies. While the risks, the history, the sacrifice, all of it was dismissed as theater. He hadn't brought the letter forward to shame anyone. Not really. He hadn't wanted vengeance, or headlines, or even the court's pity. But after everything, after losing friends to missions that didn't make the papers, after standing still while others spoke louder, after being looked through like scenery, it had finally been enough. There was a line in that letter, written years ago by a retired MI5 agent, that never left his mind. It said, "Sometimes the ones standing still are the only ones holding the line." The cab turned a corner, the courthouse shrinking in the distance behind him. And in a quiet office far from the spotlight, a low-level government official slowly closed his laptop. They told Ezra Flint he should have laughed it off, said it was just a joke. Just a late-night talk show host having a little fun. But that joke hit like a cold slap across years of silent service. He sat in his small kitchen that night, still in uniform, staring at the TV as the audience laughed at a cardboard cutout of a royal guard. His posture mocked. His stillness turned into a punchline. What they didn't know was that while the world walked by without a glance, Flint had once stood in the shadows of a palace gate while a real threat lingered nearby, his heart steady, his hand close to his sidearm. No one laughed then. It had been years since he left active duty. Now he served in a quieter role, one that didn't make headlines or win medals. But he served just the same. And in all those years, he'd never asked for thanks, just respect. That night, something shifted, not in rage, not in ego, but in resolve. 2 weeks later, he stood in court, not with fanfare, not with theatrics, just with facts, a quiet man in a plain suit, ready to correct the story. The talk show host's lawyers tried to smirk it away, to paint Flint as overly sensitive, a relic taking things too personally. But the courtroom had a way of draining performance from people, and Ezra Flint had no need for theatrics. His truth didn't need applause. He brought evidence, not just words, but classified records, declassified for this case, surveillance logs, security reports, instances where his actions, and noticed by the public, had neutralized real threats. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't dramatize. He just let the truth settle into the silence like dust in sunlight. People shifted in their seats. Reporters leaned forward. The smirks began to fade. In the corner sat a retired government official. He hadn't come for headlines, just curiosity. But one sentence stuck with him long after the proceedings ended. Sometimes the most important work looks like nothing at all. When the session adjourned, J.D. Vance, the host at the center of it all, exited the courthouse quietly. No cheers, no boos. Just the sound of camera shutters and the rustle of paper. His PR team guided him to a waiting car, all rehearsed, all routine. But something in the air had changed, and everyone felt it. There was no verdict yet, no damages awarded. But the shift had already happened. A truth had been spoken so clearly, so undeniably, that no spin could wash it away. Some reputations fall not by scandal, but by contrast, by the quiet strength of someone who never wanted a spotlight in the first place. Flint didn't linger. He left by the side door, alone, took a taxi home. No headlines followed him, but those who paid attention knew the real story had already left the building. If you've ever been dismissed because your work didn't come with applause, if your quiet hours of commitment have ever been overlooked, you know what that moment meant. Ezra Flint didn't fight for fame. He stood up for something deeper, the idea that dignity doesn't need to shout to be real. That respect isn't reserved for the loudest or most visible. It's earned in stillness, in sacrifice, in the choices made when no one's watching. He could have stayed silent, could have let the insult pass, but he didn't. Not for pride, for truth, For every man and woman who ever stood guard and was told they were just decoration. Because sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that doesn't flinch when mocked. It just stands firm and lets the facts speak louder than the laughter. Now let me ask you something. Do you believe quiet service deserves the same respect as the flashy kind? Would you have done what Flint did, stood up, even when everyone told you it wasn't worth it? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We want to hear from you. And if this story made you see those red uniforms a little differently, if it reminded you that some heroes don't ask to be noticed, hey, just show up. Every day, go ahead and tap that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel, because we bring stories like this every day, stories that reveal the truth behind the silence. Hit that bell icon so you never miss what's coming next. Trust me, you'll want to be here. And if someone in your life still thinks standing still means doing nothing, send them this video. Let them see what real presence looks like. We've got another powerful story waiting for you. Just click the video on your screen and come find out why sometimes the most courageous thing a person can do is simply stand. Thanks for watching. And remember, not all heroes make noise. Some just endure and change everything.